Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everyone, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today I've got Maddie with me. Hi Maddie.
Hi everyone.
Maddie, today we are talking about an article we recently came across. Well, it's actually a checklist linked to the My Care Space website. And we thought this would be a good opportunity to go through, I guess, to help our listeners who are interested or have invested in SDA have a bit more of a background understanding as to what happens. Still providers, the care providers working in the property and the steps that they need to go through when it comes to safety. This is actually a safety checklist for managing behaviours of concern. So always good to get a good background understanding of how carers are operating and managing their workplace, because as SDA home is their workplace. So let's just run through the checklist. It's broken down into 4 stages, being pre-shift, arriving on shift, and post-shift. So, Maddie, can I hand it over to you to start talking through us and just elaborating on the reasons for some of these points that need to be noted?
Of course. So we'll start with pre-shift. So before a support worker arrives on shift, it is very important to review all of the documentation on file. Also things such as making sure that, if there's a behaviour support plan, if it's in place, you must thoroughly read that and sign the document. This is the guide for a support worker to know anything and everything about any behaviours or potential behaviours of concern.
Can I just ask a question? I don't know if you know the answer to this, but in terms of SDA participants, how many do you think would have a behaviour support plan in place?
That's a tough one. Often...
Too hard question.
No, it's okay. Often you'll find some high physical support needs participants could have any restrictive practices in place from a behaviour support plan. So I wouldn't know the exact percentage or anything like that, but often you would come across some of those high physical support participants having that behaviour support plan in place.
And of course, people with robust funding and more likely.
Yes, of course. But yeah, no, I wouldn't know the exact percentage. I've probably come across 2 participants in my time as a support coordinator who had a PBSP in place and SDA. So yeah, probably not the right person to ask, but I'll definitely have to look into that. That's a good question, Debbie.
No problem. Yeah, I know that I've dealt with behaviour support plans when we've been looking after clients taking short-term accommodation breaks. And yeah, it's a whole different level of understanding what a participant needs in their day-to-day life and what things are needed to be just considered when looking after them.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, prior to shift, you need to complete a thorough handover with the relevant person, maybe the house manager or team leader or support worker that was previously on shift, anything like that. You need to make sure there's a thorough handover just in case if there was any behaviours of concern that happened prior to your shift that you need to be aware of just in case it sparks up again or anything like that. And then another thing that comes back to the positive behaviour support plan is understanding and discussing any restrictive practices that are in place. And then also seeing if there's any medication that needs to be administered as well. And that all comes into the handover as well. Generally in a handover, you'll have a bit of a discussion around what medication has been given and what they may be due for soon.
Sure. Now, I guess this just going off topic slightly here, but for a lot of people that we speak to, we're talking about basically the care teams working in the house. When people are purchasing an SDA dwelling, whether it's off the plan, it's already in existence, they will know that it comes with what's known as an OOA room. And a lot of people are under the misconception that that is for a carer to live in the house with the participants. This is not the case at all. This is the office for the care team. Very, very important to understand that this is where the SIL providers, the supported independent living providers, manage the operations to look after the participants in their house from. That's their office. And they do have these, shift handovers and everything happens in there where they keep their files, medicines, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and they also, one thing to note is there's also generally sort of like a small little single bed for inactive or active overnight support team as well. So yeah, it's definitely not a room for carers to live in. It is for the support workers that are on shift for that SIL home to enable them to keep track of everything that's happening in the home. Yeah,
absolutely. So back to the checklist. I think it was just really important to clarify. You might be thinking, well, handover, what's this got to do with my STA? Well, this is how things work in an STA, especially, when you've got participants that need 24/7 care. You're not going to have one carer there 24/7, obviously. So, moving on. I think the next section is arriving on shift.
Yeah, so when you arrive on shift, it's also really good to manage the environment. So taking a good look around, make notes of any objects in the support environment that could cause danger to the support worker or the wider community, and then removing those items from those spaces. Also checking for a safe zone. Obviously, this does come down to that behaviours of concern from before. So if there is a risk or of dangerous or aggressive behaviour, you need to have a spot to feel safe. I mean, one good spot could be right out the front of the property, making sure that there is a way to get out there if anything dangerous or anything like that does happen. And then record crisis contact numbers. So before each shift, if you've got a work phone or even your personal phone, make sure you can easily locate those contact numbers for extra support if the participant were to have a crisis. And of course, checking that the staffing ratio is correct. So making sure that placement is appropriately staffed and contact the appropriate persons if understaffed. Finding the paperwork. So locate the important client documentation like the daily routine, the BSP, the client communication documentation, medication documentation, client profile, any other medical documents that may be of importance. It's also really good to have these on hand if there were a fire to start in the house or something like that. You could easily just grab it and go, because if the participant does need to go to hospital or ambulances show up, you need to have that on record or on hand so that you can advise the ambulance correctly of how to assist the participant.
Sure. And look, I guess this is all really important. Obviously, a lot of the time, a participant or a house will have the same kind of team of care workers coming and going, and they'll know all of this. But very often, and I guess from your background as a support coordinator, you know that, there will be replacement carers coming in from time to time just because of rostering and whatnot. So it is really important that this is, I guess, addressed from the perspective every time.
Yeah, it's so important, especially if something unexpected were to happen and there's a staff member in the house that's not used to working there just yet because they've had to cover someone else's shift. The worst thing to happen, in my opinion, could be that they don't have these documents and the participant really, I guess, needs to go to hospital for some reason, and they don't know where any of this information is. So it is important to regularly check that you've got the paperwork on file or on hand ready to go in any case of emergency.
Yeah. So the next section is talking about actually on shift and a checklist to be aware of.
Yeah.
So if you want to run us through that.
So on shift, it's good to observe changes. So changes in body language, vocal sounds, or changes in conversation from the participant that might be a trigger for any situation. So triggers should be documented in the behaviour support plan as well and noted prior to the shift. Coming back to the exit path, know your exit strategy at all times. In case of violent behaviour, don't get caught without a clear exit path. Continue to manage the environment, keep pathways clear and remove all items that could cause harm. Wear appropriate clothing. Closed flat shoes are best so that you can move quickly. tie up long hair and do not wear any items that could be used to choke, like necklaces, lanyards, and scarves. I cannot stress that enough. We all love our jewelry. We all love our clothing, but just be wary, especially if it's participants that may have some sort of a restrictive practice in place. Make sure not to wear any necklaces or lanyards or scarves or anything that could be, again, caused or used to choke you in any situation. So that's a big one. Yeah, definitely stress that point for support workers out there. And then be mindful of the participant's trauma and background. Don't wear perfume or aftershave, no designer clothing or expensive items. Always have a spare change of clothes. This comes down to, you never know what a person has been through. Wearing the expensive perfumes and designer clothing or expensive items, it can, I guess, cause a bit of a trigger for some people, especially if they've come from not a big background of having a lot of money. It's good to keep that in the back of your mind as well. And then when in doubt, get out and call for help. Always go for help the minute something appears amiss. Don't wait until it escalates.
Yeah. I would sort of go back to that perfume and aftershave thing. I mean, the clothing is one thing, but for a lot of people, smells are such a trigger as well. So, yeah, anything that can be, a lot of people just can't stand the smell of perfumes or allergic, have all sorts of issues with them. So, yeah, really important to, and I guess this goes for anyone that might be visiting these participants as well. I mean, I guess anyone visiting them is likely to be a family member or close friend that probably knows this already, but it's just something good to keep in our mind that you don't know what kind of triggers can be for some of these participants. And this is everything that the support workers at work there really need to be aware of constantly.
And even if you forget or are unaware of these triggers, that's why having that spare change of clothes could come in handy, because the last thing you want is to be caught on shift and, potentially having a behavior because of that trigger. You can easily just go grab those spare clothes and change out of it and then de-escalate that situation.
Yeah.
And then we've got post-shift.
Yeah. That's what.
So post-shift, after you finish your shift, I can't stress this enough. Complete your case notes immediately. Support workers, it's an obligation to record any behaviours during their shift and then complete a thorough handover and debrief with the manager, team leader or support worker, especially those ones that have a positive behaviour support plan in place. It is so crucial for future support workers coming on, if it's an overnight staff or any time throughout the day, if you're providing a handover, the more thorough, the better. More information is better than less. If you're saying, or it's just giving an example of what the participants' behaviours were like during your shift, it's better to over-explain than under-explain. Therefore, that future support worker that's coming on shift is fully aware of everything that could happen in that shift and that they've already been through that day. So they can keep in mind if they're not feeling exactly up to a certain task, it may have been because of a certain trigger that happened earlier that day. It's very, very important to complete those very thorough case notes and handovers. And then manage your well-being. Make sure to spend time caring for your mental health. As a support worker, you see a lot of things. You go through a lot of, it could be traumatic shifts or deal with a lot of challenging behaviours. It's really, really, really important to make sure you're taking care of yourself as well. And if you need to seek help or see a counsellor or anything like that, do it. If it's going to help you in the long run, please do it. I think that's everything.
Yeah. I just want to talk a bit more about that point, managing your well-being from a carer's perspective. I think that another aspect of owning an SDA home, you think all will be well, there'll be an SDA manager, the SIL teams will go in and run the place with their care workers, but it can be very stressful for support workers working in that kind of environment, especially if it is with someone with behaviours of concern. And it can be actually very difficult to get enough workers in that area if you've got the skills and the ability to work in that kind of environment. So, you might, and this I guess goes to tenanting properties, and we're always talking about that and how challenging it can be to fully tenant your properties. A lot of it may simply be down to the fact that there are not enough care workers in that area to look after the participants. So it's because they need high training. They need them, they're not nursing staff necessarily, but they do need a lot of training and just need to be the right kind of person with the ability to do that job and look after people like that. So yeah, that's just a really good list highlighting the different things that support workers and care teams need to consider in that kind of an environment.
Yeah, it definitely is. It takes a lot. It takes a lot to be a support worker, the constant training, how it can affect your mental health. But it is also at the same time a very, very rewarding role as well. You get to see the change in people living with a disability. You get to help them work towards their goals and see the outcomes. And it is a very rewarding role, but also, again, very stressful. Lots of training required, and it does take a lot to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, just a little bit of background for homeowners, to SDA homeowners, to understand from a care perspective what part of what goes on in the background. So thanks for going through all that, Maddie. Appreciate your...
That's okay. I hope it was useful.
Yeah, I'm sure that people will find that very useful. And that will be it from this episode. So we'll see you guys all later.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.